You notice her glance before she intends to give it, subtle and fleeting, almost imperceptible to anyone else. Yet your awareness catches it, because the difference between ordinary men and those who command attention is first measured in presence, not words. Most men would react immediately, fumble for validation, speak hurriedly, or force an impression in a clumsy attempt to dominate the interaction, and she would retreat, unconsciously recoiling at the energy of someone who flinches at the threat of dismissal. You, however, do not move. You do not shift. You do not even acknowledge the minor tremors of her observation. Your stillness, quiet and unwavering, resonates like an unspoken signal that the average man simply cannot transmit. And this is precisely why she is drawn, not in a conscious, calculated sense, but instinctively, as though some ancient wiring in her brain is recognizing that here stands a man whose equilibrium is unshakable, whose emotional gravity cannot be diverted, whose internal authority is so complete that it alters the very atmosphere of the space around him. And she senses this, even if she cannot name it, even if she refuses to admit it. Something in her mind has begun a silent evaluation, a quiet weighing of who you are compared to what she has been conditioned to expect. It is not attraction in the superficial sense, nor is it desire alone. It is a layering of curiosity, respect, and instinctive reassessment that she cannot articulate, and most men will never perceive it. You have seen it before, the look that comes when she hesitates, when her mind flickers, briefly torn between the impulse to control and the unexplainable compulsion to observe, to understand, to align subconsciously with someone whose presence does not waver. While others react with anxiety, you maintain the same expression, the same tone, the same rhythm of your movement and speech. And this constancy, subtle yet profound, becomes the signal that she registers far deeper than casual attention, engaging pathways in her mind that are evolutionary, primal, and often invisible even to her own conscious reasoning. You are not performing, not playing a role, not manipulating. Rather, you are inhabiting a state of being that is itself magnetic, a quiet sovereignty of composure that she reads without realizing she is reading a gravitational field of steadiness that pulls her attention naturally, inexorably, and without resistance. Consider for a moment how most men respond to rejection, hesitation, or disinterest. With panic, negotiation, pleading, or over-explanation, each reaction further broadcasting insecurity, and each signal immediately devalues them in her subconscious assessment. But when you stand unmoved, when you hold your position without anxiety, without demand, you create a silent contrast that she cannot ignore, and her mind is forced to reconcile this unusual, almost alien behavior with the internal schema she carries of male worth and value. It is in this discrepancy between the predictable, anxious male and the unwavering, composed presence you embody that the real psychological tension arises, a tension that she experiences as magnetic pull, as an invisible acknowledgement that your stability is rare, perhaps unmatched, and therefore worthy of attention, curiosity, and respect. This is the hidden mechanism most men never understand. Female attraction, respect, and subconscious alignment are not granted by charm, conversation, or visible gestures alone, but by the quiet, enduring architecture of emotional self-control that communicates competence without needing to state it. Every pause you maintain, every micro-expression you resist reacting to, every subtle refusal to participate in the drama of desire or rejection, compounds, creating a silent narrative in her mind. She begins to imagine how this man would handle challenges, how he would navigate chaos, how he would respond under pressure. Even if these situations have not yet presented themselves, she is projecting potential, testing stability and evaluating constancy, all without conscious effort. And in this unseen evaluation, she begins to align not just her attention, but her instinctive approval curiosity, and intrigue toward you, all while remaining unaware of the mechanism unfolding, all while believing it is merely a passing impression or a fleeting fascination, when in reality, her mind is actively restructuring her perception of male authority. You realize, at some level, that this is a lesson most men will never learn. The world responds to composure, not desperation. Attraction is not negotiated with effort, but revealed through presence. Influence is not demanded, but earned silently through the steadfast display of emotional mastery. And the deeper truth, one that most men will never recognize, is that her subconscious recognition of your steadiness will compel her to align, reassess, and respect, not through coercion, not through charm, but through a silent acknowledgement of something that transcends ordinary interaction, a quality so rarely maintained that it becomes, to her mind, almost irresistible. As this moment stretches, your stillness is no longer passive. It is active, it is dynamic, it is a force that shapes the environment around you, not by physical movement, but by the psychological echo of calm, by the invisible but undeniable authority you carry, by the rare and irreplaceable signal of a man who does not flinch, who does not falter, and who understands that true influence is communicated through unwavering presence. And in that understanding, you begin to see why women submit. Not out of weakness, not out of manipulation, but because her mind, her instincts, and her evolutionary wiring are recognizing a man whose inner world is untouchable, whose composure is magnetic, and whose presence commands a quiet, unavoidable respect that ordinary men will spend a lifetime attempting to fabricate, unsuccessfully. There is something rare about a man who moves through rejection as if it were air. Not because he is numb, but because he understands something most never will. That rejection has never been about worth, but about perception. And perception can never wound a man who governs himself. You have felt this truth in the quiet moments after disappointment, when the noise of ego fades, and what remains is simply observation, the understanding that life bends toward those who remain unbent. A woman feels this too. The way you handle rejection tells her everything she needs to know about your internal hierarchy, whether you are ruled by validation or whether you rule over it. When you show no disturbance, when you remain entirely centered, her subconscious reads this as proof of strength, not in the performative sense, but in the evolutionary sense. Every woman carries within her mind a silent detector for instability, a biological radar searching for consistency, protection, and calm. The man who panics in the face of rejection reveals his fragility. He signals that his emotions are externally governed, that his confidence is dependent on outcome. The man who stays composed projects the opposite, that his emotional center is internal, sovereign, and unaffected by approval. That signal is ancient, and it reaches deeper than words ever could. It whispers of reliability, of direction, of safety within chaos. You see, attraction is never purely emotional. It is neurological, chemical, instinctive. When you display calmness under social threat, her brain reads it as survival competence. The same mechanism that once told her ancestors who could protect, lead, and remain unbroken when danger approached. This is why your refusal to flinch doesn't repel. It fascinates. It triggers an unconscious curiosity, not why does he not care, but what does he know that others don't? She begins to assign depth to your silence, meaning to your restraint, and power to your lack of reaction. In that subtle shift, her perception of your value multiplies, not because you sought it, but because you didn't. A woman's respect is never captured through effort. It is maintained through control. Every word you choose not to say becomes a mirror for her imagination. Every reaction you withhold forces her mind to fill in the gaps with projection. And projection, not persuasion, is the real art of influence. When she cannot read you, she must imagine you. When she must imagine you, she builds the image that aligns with her own ideal. This is how the emotionally stable man rises above the noise of competition without ever competing. He becomes an unspoken narrative inside her thoughts, a figure that expands in mystery because he does not collapse under the weight of attention or rejection. Even in your silence, you are teaching her something. That peace is not the absence of conflict, but the mastery of self within it. That a man's strength is not measured by how loud he roars, but by how deeply he listens to the silence of his own mind and remains unchanged. This realization is what begins to shift the dynamic entirely. She starts to test you, sometimes subtly, sometimes with calculated indifference, not to break you but to understand your limits, to see if your calm is authentic or performed, and every time you respond with patience rather than defensiveness, curiosity rather than complaint, you reaffirm that your emotional world cannot be dictated by her reactions. That steadiness repeated through time forges the kind of reverence most men only dream about. Understand this. A woman's attraction is sustained by emotional contrast. If you mirror her volatility, she loses respect. If you stabilize her emotional weather, she becomes fascinated. Stability is the rarest form of dominance in a chaotic world because it disarms without confrontation and influences without pressure. The man who can hold still while everything around him trembles does not need to chase power. He becomes it. His silence carries authority because it represents restraint. His detachment commands attention because it radiates confidence without arrogance. And that is precisely what she cannot find elsewhere. Not in charm, not in beauty, not in wealth, because true composure cannot be imitated. So you remain still not as a tactic, but as a principle. You are calm not to impress, but because you understand that chaos never rewards participation. You are not distant. You are deliberate. You are not indifferent. You are disciplined. This distinction is what separates you from the rest, for while they scramble for attention, you are already beyond its reach. You do not play the emotional economy, you own the currency of stillness. And the moment she senses this, her entire framework of evaluation shifts. She begins to seek your reaction not to provoke it, but to confirm it still cannot be moved. She begins to offer more of herself, not to win you, but to feel the security that radiates from your self-governance. Without ever demanding it, you have turned the entire interaction inside out. She now seeks what you never asked for, because she cannot find it anywhere else. That is the quiet symmetry of masculine composure. The more you release the need to be chosen, the more you are. The moment you no longer depend on validation, you become the source of it. And every woman who encounters that energy recognizes it instantly because deep within her mind, she knows this is not performance, this is power. Not dominance over her, but mastery over yourself. And mastery by its very nature commands respect. There comes a moment when you stop asking what to do and begin to understand what to be. It is the quiet transition from trying to control the external world to mastering the one within. A man who does not fear rejection has already crossed that threshold. He has learned that power does not emerge from dominance, but from detachment, from the ability to walk away without resentment, to remain whole even when denied. This is what unsettles a woman's perception most deeply. She is used to influence. She is accustomed to reaction. But when she meets a man who cannot be shaken from his center, she meets something both unfamiliar and unforgettable, the reflection of emotional sovereignty. You see, composure is not coldness, it is warmth contained by discipline. The stoic man feels everything, but expresses little until he chooses to. He listens, observes, interprets, and then decides what deserves his energy. To a woman, that restraint is not absence, it is magnitude. It is proof that his emotions are not ungoverned impulses, but carefully directed forces. She sees it in his eyes when he's challenged, hears it in his tone when she tests him. That rare steadiness that makes her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the quiet recognition that she is in the presence of something rooted, unmoving, and real. The man who never fears rejection lives from principle, not preference. He does not chase approval because he already approves of his own path. He does not beg for belonging because he belongs to his discipline. Every time he withholds reaction, every time he maintains calm while the world seeks to provoke him, he strengthens the invisible foundation of his authority. This is what she feels, not arrogance, not indifference, but depth. Depth that cannot be simulated, because it is forged through solitude, through trial, through the decision to stay composed when it would be easier to break. And what begins as quiet respect often becomes something far more profound. She starts to look to you as an emotional compass, not consciously, but instinctively. When her emotions spiral, she measures them against your stillness. When her thoughts race, she anchors them in your pace. Without words, you become the center of gravity in her emotional orbit, not through control, but through coherence. Your calmness gives her permission to feel safe. Your self-mastery gives her space to soften. This is the equilibrium most men will never reach, because they are too consumed by external battles to win the internal one. But you have understood. Once you master your response, you master the entire dynamic, and yet this mastery is not for her. It was never for her. It was always for you. Because every time you choose calm over chaos, patience over impulse, purpose over validation, you are sculpting the man who cannot be dethroned by circumstance. The kind of man who walks into any room with quiet certainty, whose silence speaks louder than another's need for attention, whose presence alone changes how people behave. That is the essence of true masculine power, not control over others, but control over self. So when a woman submits to a man who does not fear rejection, it is not submission in the ordinary sense. It is the natural alignment of energy towards stability. She does not kneel to the man. She aligns with the presence that he represents. Her instinct recognizes that such composure cannot be faked, and her emotions respond not with rebellion, but with respect. For the first time, she can relax into a current stronger than her own impulses, because she knows it will not waver. That is what her mind interprets as safety, what her emotions translate as attraction, and what her spirit interprets as admiration. In the end, this is not a lesson about women at all. It is a revelation about the man who becomes immovable, who has refined his strength into serenity, his desire into discipline, and his ego into purpose. The man who knows that rejection is merely direction, that control begins where reaction ends, and that composure, once mastered, becomes the most magnetic force a man can possess. When you reach this point, you no longer seek validation from women, from status, from attention. You have become validation itself, the mirror through which others measure their chaos and find peace. And as long as that calm remains unbroken, as long as you stand where others tremble, the world and she will always find their gaze returning to you. Not because you asked for it, but because you no longer need it.